Thorpe to come over because he's the lead homicide detective. And so he goes into more detail at that part. So the state, this part of the interview, Mr. Zachary, as like all of his interviews, he's not saying directly where this is coming from, but the state's position, kind of similar to yesterday, is that the primary source of Mr. Zachary's knowledge is from when he says defendant Stillwell, defendant Kendricks told him that night. He also has a brief mention when he goes down to Miami with them that he had some kind of conversation with with Demise McMullen, Nard. And so he does say, I think Nard was driving them. The state's position, and again, this may depend on the foundation of the questions he's asked, but the pool of information that the state's aware of from Zachary's statements is other co-conspirators telling him about either their own involvement in the murder.
Okay.
And Your Honor, my stance, as previously stated, is that if Mr. Zachary is claiming the source is anyone other than my client, Mr. Stillwell, I would object. However, if the source, I understand the court's prior rulings, and if the source falls under the court's prior rulings, I understand what your ruling is.
Okay.
But I don't, as I sit here now, I have no idea what his source is with some of these statements that he's making.
Okay. Well, I think we have to take the entirety of the statement into consideration, but that would fall under my prior rulings with regard to the co-conspirator exception, so that'll be permitted.
We can be glad there are now only 6 defendants sitting in this trial, because I think the number originally was in the 20s, and then all these folks took deals. So it's certainly helped narrow down the defendants, but not necessarily the important witnesses. Katherine Lizardo is here, Leah Roberts. Leah, so we've got this group of gentlemen that are all taking deals, and they're going to queue up for this jury yet again. It just seems to me that from the prosecution standpoint, we talk about that occasional snitch or the confidential informant and how you're going to be looked at, a little side eye. All of their witnesses are looked at a little side eye. I just don't know how that sells.
I think that, of course, we know that a co-conspirator statement is an exception to hearsay, right? It's an out-of-court statement. It's offered for its truth. But I think in this context, if I'm speaking to my co-conspirators who have allegedly either committed these crimes with me or committed the crimes with another co-defendant and told me about it, this is all falls under that exception to the co-conspirator rule. So I think the issue that we're having now is the credibility of these statements, right? Because, of course, everyone's trying to save their own skin, for lack of a better term, and look out for themselves. So you'll have this issue where, are these statements truthful, or are they really just to throw off law enforcement or to have them look at another individual instead of me so I do less time?
And I wonder, too, Katherine, these guys allegedly have a violent streak, depending on who you believe and what evidence you might believe. How quick to roll over on the remaining defendants would these people be if they thought it might jeopardize their lives? So maybe they are just lying to help themselves, but they have to walk the line and not really incriminate the sitting defendants.
It is a lot of assumptions that we have to assume, and the jury will be tasked to do the same thing. The jury understands that these witnesses are supposedly part of these this YSL gang that the prosecution is claiming. And so they have to think in terms of these witnesses' rap sheet. Like you mentioned, Copeland alone had such a long list of prior crimes and convictions and guilty pleas that they had to figure out what exactly will come in and will be talked about regarding his credibility, to question his credibility. So the jury will know that, yes, their credibility will be questionable already at the beginning. And so how much are we going to put weight on what they're going to say? Excuse me. So that's what the jury has to figure out.
Yeah, we've got, all these redactions that we've been talking about, these were based on police interviews that will then be used primarily to impeach these witnesses when the defense or even the prosecution hears them stray from what they said in these police interviews. So if the police interview lines up against the defendants, great, but if they waffle on the stand, those interviews are going to come back to haunt them. Okay, lots of redactions that we got into. We may get into some more, but for now, let's take a break. We'll come back to Law and Crime, more on the young thug case after